For a decade, she has been the silent victim, the ghost at their wedding feast. A name mentioned in anger, a legal obstacle to be overcome, but never a person with a story of her own. She was the inconvenient truth Sumit tried to bury, the first chapter he ripped out of his love story with Jenny. But the past does not stay buried forever. Now, for the first time, an insider report gives a voice to the woman he tried to erase. For the first time, Sumit's first wife tells her story, and it is more damning, more chilling, and reveals a pattern of cruelty more calculated than you can ever imagine. This isn't just another recap. This is the story you were never meant to hear. We are about to unravel a decade of deception that proves the man we see on screen is not a love-struck fool, but a master manipulator. If you believe in uncovering the truth and giving a voice to the voiceless, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this exclusive investigation. To understand the magnitude of the lie, we must first revisit the story we were sold. The official narrative, as curated by Sumit Singh and TLC, is a tragic romance worthy of a Bollywood script. A young Indian man trapped in a joyless arranged marriage finds a spark of life, a soul connection, with an American woman online. He lies, yes, but they are lies of desperation. He catfishes her, pretending to be a handsome model named Michael Jones, but it's only because he fears she won't accept his true self. He hides his marriage, but it's only because he is terrified of losing her and disappointing his traditional family. Every deception is framed as a necessary evil on the path to true love. We, the audience, are meant to see Sumit as a sympathetic character, a man caught between two worlds, between duty and desire. We are led to believe that his marriage was a hollow arrangement, devoid of emotion or connection, making his betrayal not just understandable but almost noble. He was fighting for love against impossible odds. His first wife was simply a casualty of this epic romance, a footnote in the great love story of Sumit and Jenny. But what if that entire premise is a fabrication? What if the loveless, empty marriage was not the cause of his deception, but the first casualty of it? What if the cruelty and deceit didn't begin when he met Jenny, but was a fundamental part of his character all along? An exclusive, off-the-record account, a secret interview pieced together from sources close to the situation, paints a profoundly different and disturbing picture. It's a picture of a young woman who entered a marriage with hope, only to find herself in a psychological prison built by the man who was supposed to be her partner. This isn't a story about a man who lied for love. This is the story of a man who uses lies to control, to dominate, and to feed a deep-seated need for power. And his first wife was not a footnote. She was his trial run. According to this secret testimony, the emotional distance from Sumit was present from the very beginning. It wasn't a gradual cooling off. It was a constant, calculated campaign of psychological warfare. The woman he married describes a man who was a ghost in his own home. He was physically present, but emotionally absent, a stranger sharing her living space. But this was not a passive neglect. It was an active, insidious cruelty designed to erode her self-worth, piece by piece. He would allegedly engage in classic gaslighting, the kind of subtle manipulation that makes a person question their own sanity. She would recount an event, a conversation, a promise made, and he would flatly deny it ever happened. He would look at her with a calm, convincing sincerity and say, "You must be remembering it wrong," or "You're being too sensitive, I never said that." Over time, this constant denial of her reality made her feel unstable, as if her own mind was betraying her. She began to doubt her perceptions, her memory, her own feelings. This is the primary tool of an emotional abuser, to isolate the victim inside their own head, making them believe they are the source of the problem. The cruelty extended to every aspect of her life. He allegedly made constant, underhanded comments about her appearance, her cooking, her intelligence. These weren't overt insults that could be easily identified and fought against. They were couched in the language of concern or jest. "That dress is an interesting choice," he might say with a slight smirk that made her feel foolish. Or after a meal she'd spent hours preparing, "It's good, but my mother makes it with a little more spice." Each comment was a small cut, insignificant on its own, but together they bled her confidence dry. She found herself constantly trying to please a man who was impossible to please, changing her clothes, her recipes, her very personality, in a desperate attempt to win a scrap of affection or approval that never came. He was creating a power dynamic where he was the judge, and she was perpetually falling short. The lies, the constant pathological lies, were the bedrock of his control. Long before Jenny knew him as Michael Jones, his first wife knew him as a man who was never where he said he was. He would claim to be working late, but his colleagues would later mention the office closed early. He would say he was out with friends, but his phone would be turned off for hours, unreachable. When confronted with these inconsistencies, he wouldn't just deny them. He would turn the accusation back on her, a tactic 90-Day Fiancé viewers have seen time and time again. Why are you checking up on me? Don't you trust me? Your insecurity is going to ruin our marriage. Suddenly, she wasn't the one who was lied to. She was the one with the trust issues. She was the one who was crazy and controlling for wanting to know where her own husband was. He masterfully shifted the blame, making her feel guilty for questioning his blatant deception. She was living in a constant state of anxiety, knowing something was deeply wrong but being told that the wrongness was inside of her. This secret testimony suggests that the most painful part was the isolation. Sumit allegedly created a narrative for his family and friends that she was a difficult, demanding, and unhappy wife. He would complain to his parents about her, twisting her reactions to his cruelty into evidence of her instability. When she was upset because he had lied to her, he would tell his mother, "She is always crying, always starting fights over nothing." When she was quiet and withdrawn, beaten down by the constant gaslighting, he would tell his father, "She is so cold and distant. She makes no effort." He was preemptively poisoning the well, ensuring that if she ever did try to seek help or expose his behavior, no one would believe her. She would be seen as the hysterical wife he had been complaining about for months. The family, particularly his mother Sahna, chose to believe their son. It was easier to blame the outsider, the daughter-in-law, than to confront the chilling possibility that their son, their pride and joy, was a cruel and deceitful man. They saw her sadness and interpreted it as a failure to make their son happy, never once questioning if their son was the source of her misery. This brings us to the most damning part of this hidden story: the family's complicity. The narrative Sumit and his family presented on television was one of shock and betrayal when they discovered his secret life with Jenny. They claimed to be completely blindsided, but the ex-wife's account suggests this is a profound falsehood. They may not have known about Jenny specifically, but they were allegedly well aware of Sumit's unhappiness because he had been curating that narrative for them for years. They knew about the emotional distance. They knew he was spending long hours away from home. They knew his marriage was a facade. But they chose to blame her. They chose to see her as the problem. This wasn't just a blind spot. It was a deliberate choice to enable their son's behavior. Their rage at the confrontation with Jenny's landlord and Sumit's in-laws wasn't just about the shame of an affair. It was the rage of people whose carefully constructed family narrative had been shattered in an instant. They weren't just angry at Sumit's lie. They were angry that he got caught, and that his victim wasn't playing her part and suffering in silence. This pattern of family enablement is crucial. It created the environment where Sumit's deception could fester and grow. With his family already convinced that his wife was the problem, it gave him a blank check to do whatever he wanted. His secret online life wasn't a desperate escape. It was an entitled indulgence, facilitated by a family that consistently took his side and invalidated the feelings of the woman he was systematically breaking down. They weren't just bystanders. They were accessories to emotional abuse. They provided the cover story. They provided the validation. They allowed him to paint himself as the victim in his own home, a narrative he would later perfect for an international television audience. Now, let's place Jenny in this context. Jenny Slatton, the woman from Palm Springs, believed she was the exception. She believed she was Sumit's one true love, the soulmate he was willing to risk everything for. She endured the catfishing, the lies about his marital status, the endless delays with the divorce, the constant battles with his family, all under the assumption that these were extraordinary measures taken for an extraordinary love. She believed the deception was a product of his circumstances, not a product of his character. The secret interview with his first wife shatters this illusion. It reframes everything. Jenny wasn't the reason for the lies. She was just the next recipient of them. Sumit wasn't a novice deceiver fumbling his way through a complicated affair. He was a seasoned professional, honing his skills for years on his first wife. Consider the parallels. The gaslighting. How many times have we seen Sumit tell Jenny one thing and his parents another, leaving Jenny confused and isolated? He would promise her they would live separately, then tell his parents they would all live together. When Jenny would get upset, he would often act bewildered, as if she were overreacting, making her feel like her desire for a normal, private life with her husband was an unreasonable demand. He was denying her reality, just as he allegedly denied his first wife's. The constant lies, The most obvious, of course, was the lie about his marriage itself, a lie he maintained for years. But it continued long after. He lied about the progress of the divorce. He lied about his intentions to tell his parents. He lied about his financial situation. The lies were not a one-time event. They were his default mode of operation. His conversations were a maze of half-truths and strategic omissions, designed to keep everyone in a state of confusion while he maintained control. And the blame shifting. This is perhaps the most chilling parallel. When his lies would inevitably collapse, Sumit's primary tactic was to portray himself as the ultimate victim, crushed between his love for Jenny and his duty to his parents. His tears, his panic attacks, his dramatic displays of despair, were they genuine heartbreak, or were they a calculated performance designed to deflect blame and elicit sympathy? The first wife's story suggests the latter. He used emotional theatrics to make others feel sorry for him, to make them forget that the entire crisis was a result of his own choices and his own deception. He made Jenny feel guilty for pushing him to confront his parents. He made his parents feel guilty for not accepting his choices. He positioned himself at the center of the drama, the tragic hero of a story he himself had authored. He was never the villain, always the victim of circumstance. This is not a man who lies for love. A man who lies for love tells one big lie to escape a bad situation and build a new, honest life. He does not build his new life on a foundation of 1,000 new lies. A man who lies for love does not systematically dismantle the self-worth of one woman while simultaneously deceiving another. That is not the behavior of a romantic fool. That is the playbook of a predator. The theory presented in this secret tell-all is that Sumit is a serial emotional abuser who thrives on control. The power he wielded came from compartmentalization. He had his wife sequestered and controlled through gaslighting and emotional neglect. He had his online fantasy life with Jenny, controlled through catfishing and a carefully curated victim narrative. He had his family, controlled by feeding them a story where he was the dutiful but unhappy son. He was the only one who knew all the pieces of the puzzle. This gave him an immense sense of power. He was the puppet master, and everyone else in his life, his wife, his mistress, his parents, were puppets dancing on his strings. The confrontation that led to his divorce was not a moment of romantic reckoning. It was the moment the puppet master lost control. When his wife's family stormed the apartment, it was a catastrophic system failure. The walls between his separate, controlled worlds came crashing down. His fear and panic in that moment were not the fear of a man losing his soulmate. It was the terror of a manipulator being exposed, of his entire elaborate web of deceit being set on fire. He was not afraid of losing Jenny. He was afraid of losing control. So what does this mean for Jenny now? For years, she has operated under the belief that the cruelty was directed at the situation, not at a person. She believed the title of wife was just a legal entanglement, not a human being who was being emotionally tortured behind the scenes. The publication of this theoretical interview, this voice from the past, would force her to confront a devastating truth. She would have to read, in excruciating detail, how the man she married treated another woman with the exact same patterns of deception that he used on her. She would see the gaslighting, not as a response to family pressure, but as a go-to tactic. She would see the lies, not as a temporary measure, but as a fundamental part of his communication style. She would see the manipulation of his parents, not as a desperate act of a cornered man, but as a lifelong strategy of self-preservation. Every romantic justification she has built up over the years would crumble. She wasn't his one true love who inspired him to break free. She was the next target. She was the next source of validation, the next secret world he could control. The thrill for Sumit, perhaps, was never about being with Jenny in a normal public life. The thrill was in the secret itself. The thrill was in the deception, the double life, the power of knowing that he was successfully fooling everyone around him. Once the secret was out, once he was forced into a legitimate public marriage with Jenny, the dynamic shifted. The game was over. Is it any wonder that their married life on screen seems to be a constant struggle for control? The bickering over household chores, the arguments about work, the tension with his family, it's all a continuation of his need to dominate his environment and his partner. The most chilling revelation from this secret interview is the idea that Sumit's first wife and Jenny are not opposites, but sisters in a shared, tragic experience, separated only by time and geography. One was the wife he hid from his mistress. The other was the mistress he hid from his wife. Both were fed carefully tailored narratives. Both were manipulated. Both were victims of a man whose deepest need is not for love, but for control. The first wife was trapped in a home with him, subjected to his daily campaign of emotional erosion. Jenny was trapped in a digital fantasy, falling in love with a carefully constructed illusion. Both women were sold a lie, and both have paid a terrible price. The story we've been told is that Sumit divorced a woman he didn't love to be with a woman he did. But the story this secret testimony tells is that Sumit simply traded one victim for another. He escaped the consequences of his first deception by creating a second, more elaborate one. He has never been held accountable for the emotional damage he inflicted on his first wife. In fact, he was rewarded for it. He got a TV show, a degree of international fame, and a new partner who, for a long time, was willing to accept his lies as part of their epic love story. He has successfully erased his first wife, not just from his life, but from the public narrative, painting her as a nameless, faceless obstacle. But she is not an obstacle. She is a person, a woman whose life was irrevocably damaged by his pattern of cruelty and deceit. Her story doesn't just change our perception of Sumit's past. It completely redefines our understanding of his present with Jenny. It serves as a stark and terrifying warning. The patterns of behavior do not simply disappear. The lies do not stop just because the wedding rings have been exchanged. A man who builds his life on a foundation of deceit will always be living in a house of cards. And it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down again. The question for Jenny is whether she will be able to get out from under the rubble when it does. The ex-wife's story is not just history, it is a prophecy. It proves that for a man like Sumit, the past is never really the past. It's just a rehearsal for the future. He is not a reformed character. He is simply a man who has gotten better at his game. The emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the pathological lying, these are not flaws he has overcome. They are the tools of his trade. He used them to control his first wife, and he continues to use them to control Jenny, his family, and the television audience. Let's dissect the very nature of his on-screen persona through this new lens. Think about his demeanor. He often appears soft-spoken, passive, even henpecked, especially in his interactions with Jenny or his mother. This could be interpreted as a man who is simply non-confrontational, a gentle soul overwhelmed by the strong women in his life. However, if we apply the theory of the calculated manipulator, this passivity becomes a weapon. It's a form of passive aggression. By appearing weak and indecisive, he forces others to take the lead, to make the demands, to be the bad guy. Then he can resent them for the very actions he manipulated them into taking. He wanted to leave his first wife, but instead of taking responsibility, his emotional withdrawal and alleged cruelty likely pushed her to a point of misery, making the eventual separation seem like a mutual failure or even her fault. Similarly, with Jenny, he resisted telling his parents for years. He would agree to do it, then back out, citing fear and pressure. This forced Jenny into the position of being the demanding, impatient one. He created a situation where her perfectly reasonable desire for an honest, open relationship was framed as nagging. It's a brilliant strategy. He gets what he wants while making the other person look like the aggressor. He maintains his image as the poor, tortured soul caught in the middle. This framework also explains his relationship with his parents, particularly his mother, Sahna. Their dynamic is often portrayed as a classic case of an overbearing mother and a dutiful son. But what if it's a codependent relationship built on mutual manipulation? Sumit uses his parents' traditionalism as a perpetual excuse for his deceitful behavior. I can't tell them the truth. They'll never understand. I have to lie to protect them. This allows him to indefinitely postpone any difficult conversations or commitments. He infantilizes himself, acting as though he is powerless against their will, yet he consistently does exactly what he wants to do, just in secret. He is not a powerless son. He is a 40-year-old man who has discovered that acting like a child is an effective way to evade adult responsibility. In turn, his parents, especially Sahna, enable this behavior because it allows them to maintain a sense of control and importance in his life. Their dramatic opposition to Jenny wasn't just about age or culture. It was about the threat she posed to their established dynamic. Jenny represented a final choice, an end to the ambiguity that Sumit had cultivated for a decade. As long as he was torn, as long as he was seeking their approval, they held power over him. A happy, independent, married Sumit would no longer need them in the same way. Their emotional outbursts and threats of disownment were a desperate attempt to keep him within their sphere of influence, a sphere that Sumit himself had carefully constructed to serve his own purposes. It's a toxic feedback loop, where everyone is manipulating everyone else, and Sumit is the one who benefits most from the chaos. Let's reconsider the biggest lie of all, catfishing. The show presented it as a cute, albeit misguided, romantic gesture. Sumit lacked confidence, so he used the picture of a model. But the ex-wife's story forces us to see it in a much more sinister light. Catfishing is not about a lack of confidence. It is about control. It is about creating a false identity to manipulate another person's emotions. Sumit, as Michael Jones, could be anyone he wanted to be. He could create a perfect persona, free from the complications of his real life. He wasn't just hiding his appearance, he was hiding his marriage, his family, his entire reality. This was not a small white lie. It was the creation of a comprehensive fictional universe in which he was the god, and Jenny was his devoted follower. It was the ultimate act of gaslighting, convincing a woman to fall in love with a man who did not exist. The reveal of his true identity was not a moment of honest confession. It was a calculated risk. He had already secured Jenny's emotional investment. He knew she was in love with the personality, the connection they had built. By revealing himself, he was testing the strength of his own manipulation. Would the emotional bond he created be strong enough to overcome the massive deception at its foundation? For him, it was a gamble, and it paid off. Jenny's willingness to forgive this monumental lie was, in a way, the ultimate validation for him. It proved the power of his emotional control. It taught him that Jenny's capacity for forgiveness was vast, a resource he could draw upon again and again. Every subsequent lie was built on the precedent set by the first. If she could forgive the catfishing, she could forgive the secret marriage. If she could forgive the secret marriage, she could forgive the delays in the divorce. He wasn't just lying, he was testing her boundaries, pushing them further and further with each new deception. This brings us back to the pain of his first wife. For her, there was no Michael Jones. She was married to the real Sumit Singh, and her testimony would be that the real Sumit is the lie. The charming, loving man he pretended to be online with Jenny was a character. The real man was the one who came home to her, cold, distant, and cruel. She experienced the truth of his character, while Jenny fell in love with the fiction. This is the ultimate tragedy of the story. Both women were deceived, but in opposite ways. One was deceived by a beautiful fantasy, the other was destroyed by a brutal reality. Imagine the reckoning Jenny would face. She would have to reevaluate every single proof of Sumit's love. Was he fighting for her, or was he just fighting to maintain his double life? Did he cry because he loved her so much, or because he was terrified of the consequences of getting caught? Was his devotion to her a sign of true love, or was it a form of love bombing, an intense display of affection designed to keep her hooked while he continued to lie and manipulate behind the scenes? Love bombing is a classic tactic of manipulators. It involves showering a new partner with intense affection, flattery, and grand gestures, creating a powerful emotional bond very quickly. This bond then makes it harder for the victim to leave when the negative behaviors, the lies, the gaslighting, the control begin to emerge. Looking back, Sumit's entire courtship of Jenny fits this pattern perfectly. The constant communication, the grand promises, the us against the world narrative, it all served to forge a bond so strong that it could withstand the eventual revelation of his lies. The ex-wife's story, therefore, is not just her story. It is a Rosetta Stone for understanding Jenny's entire relationship. It decodes Sumit's behavior, revealing the manipulative intent behind his seemingly romantic or desperate actions. It proves that Jenny was not a unique case. She did not change him. He simply adapted his long-standing methods of deception to fit a new target. The story he told his first wife to explain his absences and emotional distance was likely as elaborate and convincing as the story he told Jenny about his oppressive family. He is a storyteller, and his favorite character is himself, the tragic, misunderstood hero. This narrative allows him to commit acts of profound selfishness and cruelty while maintaining a clear conscience. In his mind, he is always the victim, and his actions are always justified. If this insider account were to become public, the final call to action, is Sumit a romantic fool or a calculated predator, becomes terrifyingly easy to answer. The evidence of a pattern, of a repeated modus operandi, is the single most compelling argument against the romantic fool theory. Fools make mistakes. They might lie once out of panic. They don't construct intricate, multi-year deceptions that span continents and destroy multiple lives. They don't systematically break down one woman's spirit while simultaneously building a fantasy world for another. That requires planning, skill, and a chilling lack of empathy. That is the work of a predator. The hashtag her name is known would be more than just a social media trend. It would be a rebellion against the narrative Sumit has so carefully controlled. It would be a declaration that the woman he tried to turn into a ghost has a voice, a story, and a truth that can no longer be silenced. It would force viewers to see that the drama they've been consuming as entertainment has had a real human cost, and that the first victim of Sumit's great love story was not his own heart, but the wife he left broken in the wreckage of his lies. Sharing her story would not be about punishing Jenny. It would be about liberating her, giving her the one thing Sumit never has, the unvarnished, devastating truth. And with that truth, the choice is hers, to remain the next chapter in a predator's playbook, or to finally close the book on him forever. To truly grasp the genius of this alleged manipulation, we must re-examine the evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. We have all seen the key moments of the Sumit and Jenny saga, but we have been watching the wrong movie. We thought it was a romance, when we should have been watching a psychological thriller. Let's go back to the moment Sumit's marriage was revealed. Remember the scene? The sheer chaos, the screaming, the arrival of his wife's family. Sumit's reaction was one of pure, abject terror. The official narrative is that this was the terror of a man about to lose the love of his life, Jenny. But what if we look at it through the lens of the ex-wife's testimony? What if it wasn't the fear of losing love, but the fear of a predator whose carefully segregated worlds had just collided? A manipulator like the one described in these secret reports thrives on compartmentalization. He had his Jenny box, a world of fantasy, escape, and adoration. He had his wife box, a world of duty, control, and simmering cruelty. And he had his family box, a world where he was the dutiful, victimized son. He was the only one with the keys to all three boxes. At that moment, when his father-in-law stormed the apartment, all the boxes burst open at once. The lie was no longer sustainable. His performance as the heartbroken lover for Jenny was exposed. His performance as the dutiful husband for his in-laws was exposed. His performance as the unhappy but compliant son for his own family was exposed. This wasn't the panic of a lover. It was the systemic meltdown of a master manipulator whose entire operating system had crashed. His terror was the terror of exposure, the fear of having to face all of his victims in the same room at the same time, the fear of the consequences he had expertly avoided for years. Now consider the family's reaction. Sahna and Anil's rage was monumental. We were led to believe it was the shame of adultery, the dishonor he brought upon their name. And certainly, that was a part of it. But the ex-wife's story suggests a deeper source for their fury. If they had been complicit in ignoring their son's unhappiness and blaming his first wife for it, then this public explosion wasn't just about an affair. It was about their own narrative being shattered. They had participated in the cover-up of one broken marriage, and now their son had created a scandal so public, so humiliating, that it could not be swept under the rug. Their anger was the anger of co-conspirators whose lead actor had gone off script. He hadn't just betrayed his wife and Jenny, he had betrayed the family's unspoken agreement to maintain appearances at all costs. He had made their private dysfunction a public spectacle, and for a family obsessed with honor and social standing, that was the ultimate sin. Their rage was not moral, it was social. It wasn't about the lie, it was about the fact that he got caught so spectacularly. Let's talk about Sumit's most potent weapon, his tears. Throughout the series, Sumit's emotional breakdowns have been a recurring theme. His panic attacks, his sobbing fits, his declarations of being torn apart. These moments are designed to elicit sympathy from Jenny and from the audience. We see him and we think, look at this poor man. He's in so much pain. His love must be real. But in the context of a serial manipulator, emotional displays are not a sign of vulnerability. They are a tool of control. It is a phenomenon known as strategic incompetence, or, in this case, strategic fragility. When the pressure is on, when he is cornered by his lies, he has a breakdown. What does this accomplish? First, it immediately shifts the focus from the problem he created to his own suffering. Jenny wants to talk about the lie, but suddenly she has to comfort a sobbing, hyperventilating man. The conversation is derailed. Second, it induces guilt in the person confronting him. Jenny is made to feel like she is the one causing his pain by pressuring him. Her legitimate anger is transformed into guilt. She starts to think, am I pushing him too hard? Am I the reason he's falling apart? And third, it reinforces his victim narrative. He is not the perpetrator of the deceit. He is the primary victim of the difficult circumstances. His tears are a smokescreen, a brilliant piece of emotional misdirection that allows him to escape accountability time and time again. The ex-wife's testimony would suggest that she, too, likely saw these displays whenever she got too close to the truth about his emotional distance or his secret life. This pattern is starkly evident in their attempts at marriage counseling. On the surface, Sumit's willingness to go to therapy with Jenny seems like a positive step, but watch those sessions closely. He rarely, if ever, takes full, unprompted ownership of the pain he caused. His apologies are often qualified. "I'm sorry, but my parents," or "I'm sorry, but I was scared." The focus is always on his reasons, his fears, his justifications. He talks about his own suffering far more than he acknowledges the years of deception he inflicted on Jenny. A therapist's office, for a manipulator, is not a place for healing. It is a new stage. It's a place to perform the role of the remorseful partner in a controlled environment, to say the right things to placate Jenny and the therapist, and to once again frame himself as a man who made mistakes for all the right romantic reasons. He is not there to change. He is there to manage the crisis and get the relationship back to a status quo where he is in control. And then there are the financial lies, the constant ambiguity about his job, his income, the money he borrowed from his father to pay for his divorce. These were not just minor deceptions. They are part of the larger pattern of control. Financial control is a cornerstone of abuse. By keeping Jenny in the dark about his true financial situation, he maintained a power imbalance. She was the one with the retirement savings, the one providing a stable financial base. Yet he was the one controlling the information. This created a dependency. She needed him to navigate the bureaucracy, to deal with his family, to manage their day-to-day finances in India. This lack of transparency kept her in a state of uncertainty, making it harder for her to make fully informed decisions about her own life and her own money. It was another way to keep her tethered to him, another secret he held that gave him power. The ex-wife's account would likely echo this, detailing a man who was secretive about money, using it as another tool to create distance and maintain control within his first marriage as well. Now we must turn our focus to Jenny and the psychological prison she has been living in for over a decade. To an outside observer, her choices may seem baffling. Why would a woman stay with a man who lied to her so profoundly for so long? To understand her perspective, we have to understand the powerful psychological forces at play, chief among them being the sunk cost fallacy. This is the idea that we are reluctant to abandon a course of action because we have already invested heavily in it, even when it's clear that abandonment would be the more rational choice. Jenny has invested more than 10 years of her life. She sold her home, she left her children and grandchildren, she moved across the world, and she has spent a significant portion of her life savings. To walk away now would be to admit that all of that sacrifice was for nothing. It would be to admit that the dream she staked her entire life on was a lie. Psychologically, it is often easier to double down on the investment, to keep believing, to keep hoping that it will all be worth it in the end, than it is to face the crushing weight of that loss. Sumit's manipulation is predicated on this. He knows how much she has sacrificed. Every grand romantic gesture, every tearful apology is another small deposit, another reason for her to stay invested, making it that much harder for her to ever cash out. Furthermore, Sumit has engineered a situation of profound isolation for Jenny. By moving her to India, he removed her from her entire support system. Her friends, her daughters, the people who could offer an objective perspective are thousands of miles and a dozen time zones away. In India, her entire world is Sumit. He is her translator, her cultural guide, her only real companion. This dependency is not a romantic side effect of their international love story. It is a feature of his control. When you are isolated, your partner's voice becomes the only one you hear. Their version of reality becomes your reality. When he tells her she's overreacting, there is no one there to say, "No, your feelings are valid." When he tells her a new lie to cover an old one, there is no one to help her poke holes in the story. She is living in an echo chamber of his creation. Her occasional trips back to America are a threat to his control, which is why he has always resisted the idea of them moving there. In America, she would have her power back. She would have her family. She would be on her own turf. In India, she is a guest in his world, a world where he writes the rules. At the very core of her willingness to stay is the one true love narrative. This is the central pillar of their story, the belief that their connection is so special, so cosmic, that it transcends all the lies and betrayals. Jenny has to believe this. It is the only justification that can make sense of the immense pain she has endured. She has to believe that she is the exception, that the way he treated his first wife has no bearing on how he feels about her. She must see his first marriage as a loveless prison and his relationship with her as a liberating escape. The secret testimony of the ex-wife is a direct assault on this foundational belief. It suggests that the behavior is the man. It suggests that there is no old Sumit and new Sumit. There is only Sumit, the manipulator, who deploys the same tactics on different targets. If Jenny were to truly absorb this, her entire narrative would collapse. She would be forced to see that she wasn't the cure for his unhappiness. She was just a new form of the same disease. The love story would be revealed as a case study in deceptive pathology, and that is a truth too devastating for most people to bear. We must also consider the inherent power imbalance created by their age difference and circumstances. Jenny is a retiree. Her time to work and build a new life is limited. Leaving Sumit would mean returning to America in her late 60s, having spent much of her savings to start over from scratch. That is a terrifying prospect. Sumit, on the other hand, is much younger. He has his whole life ahead of him. This reality, whether spoken or not, hangs over every interaction. He has more options. He has more time. This gives him an incredible amount of leverage. Jenny's vulnerability is not a weakness in her character. It is a simple fact of her situation, and it's a vulnerability that a calculated predator would know how to exploit. He can push boundaries, create drama, and test her limits, knowing that the consequences of her leaving are far more catastrophic for her than they are for him. This leads us to a deeper examination of the family, not just as enablers, but as architects of the deceit. Their obsession with honor is the key. In many traditional cultures, the family's reputation in the community is paramount. The greatest sin is not the act itself, but the public shame it brings. If we accept the ex-wife's story, then Sumit's family was likely aware of the profound dysfunction in his first marriage. But it was a private dysfunction. As long as the couple remained married and presented a united front to the world, honor was maintained. The problem with Jenny was not the affair itself, it was her visibility. She was an older, white American woman. She was impossible to hide. The relationship was inherently public and scandalous. Their fury was directed at the public nature of the humiliation. He had not just broken marriage vows, he had broken the unspoken family rule. Whatever you do, do not bring shame upon this house. The cruelty inflicted on his first wife behind closed doors was acceptable because it was private. The love affair with Jenny was unacceptable because it was public. This is a chilling moral calculus. It prioritizes the appearance of integrity over the reality of it. Sahna, in particular, is a master of this game. Her journey from outright rejection of Jenny to a grudging acceptance has been portrayed as a mother's heart slowly softening. But is it, or is it a strategic pivot? When she realized she could not break them up, she moved to the next phase of control, assimilation. Her attempts to mold Jenny into a traditional Indian daughter-in-law were not about cultural education. They were about reasserting her dominance. By teaching Jenny to cook and clean to her standards, she was establishing a new hierarchy, one where she was still the matriarch and Jenny was the submissive newcomer. Her acceptance was conditional. It was contingent on Jenny conforming to her rules and Sumit remaining within her sphere of influence. She didn't lose the war, she just changed the battlefield from one of open conflict to one of domestic guerrilla warfare. She is not a victim of her son's choices. She is a shrewd political operator, fighting to maintain her power base within the family structure. The family did not just allow the deceit to happen. Their rigid, honor-obsessed value system created the very environment where such deceit was a logical, almost necessary survival tactic for someone like Sumit. Now, let's deconstruct their happily ever after. The marriage has happened, the primary obstacle has been overcome. So why does the conflict continue? Why do their scenes on the show still revolve around tension, arguments, and unhappiness? Because the fundamental dynamic has not changed. The original deception is over, but the pattern of control must continue. The arguments about Sumit getting a job, about Jenny's role in the household, about whether to move to America, these are not normal marital squabbles. They are the next chapter in the ongoing power struggle. Sumit resisted getting a job because his financial ambiguity gave him power. He resists moving to America because his geographic control gives him power. He creates conflict over household duties as a way to assert his dominance and play the victim, often complaining that Jenny's expectations are too high, echoing the same complaints he allegedly made about his first wife. The ghost of the past haunts every frame of their life together. Jenny's insecurity, her constant need for reassurance, is a direct result of the trauma of his initial deception. She can never be fully secure in the relationship because its foundation is made of sand. His defensiveness, his immediate retreat into the victim role whenever he is challenged, shows that he has no real concept of accountability. He has not learned from his past, he has simply learned how to manage its consequences. Their marriage is not a new beginning, it is a continuation of the same toxic patterns, just without the central lie of the first marriage to orbit around. So they must find new things to lie about, new conflicts to create, to keep the dynamic of control and manipulation alive. And now the audience has become the new target of his manipulation. The Sumit we see on camera is a performance. He is playing the role of the redeemed husband. He is selling a story of growth and change. He knows what the audience wants to see. A man who fought for love and won, a man who has learned from his mistakes and is now dedicated to his wife. But the insider report from his ex-wife suggests this is just his latest and most ambitious role. He is no longer just manipulating the women in his life. He is manipulating a global audience of millions. He is using the platform of reality television to launder his reputation, to recast himself as a romantic hero. The show itself has become his accomplice, editing and framing his story to maximize drama and sympathy, often at the expense of the truth. So we are left with a final chilling verdict. Two wives, a decade apart, suffering the same lies. The story of Sumit's first wife is not a separate story. It is the prequel. It is the origin story of the man we see on screen. It provides the context, the pattern, and the proof. It transforms the narrative from a questionable romance into a clear-cut case of serial emotional manipulation. The question is no longer whether Jenny should have forgiven him. The question is whether she and we, the audience, can finally see him for who this secret report alleges he truly is. Not a romantic fool, but a calculated predator. Not a man who lies for love, but a man who loves to lie because it gives him the one thing he truly craves: power. Her name, the name of the woman he tried to erase, deserves to be known. Not for revenge, but for the truth. Because her story holds a mirror up to Jenny's, and in its reflection, the illusion shatters, and the devastating reality is all that remains. Share this investigation to give a voice to the woman he tried to silence.